Boom. Okay, we're good. Sweet. So, hi. Oh, sweet. Awesome. Good stuff. So, vocal coach Ken Taylor here. And this is kind of an interesting situation because um I've been doing this online coaching thing for quite some time. I started off about 10, 11 years ago with Singing Tips blog and created a site called Ask a Vocal Coach. A little bit after that, created some YouTube videos, which some of you guys are watching me from now. And my goal and all of what I've done has really been to help you guys take your voice to the next level. And up until now, I've really had to put myself in the position of saying, hey, what do people want to know? And do my best to answer that. But the cool thing about our technology nowadays is that now I can just ask you guys live and then get back to you. So it's really cool. I'm excited about this. My first live stream Q&A. It's going to probably not be without bumbles, but it should be a lot of fun. So what I'm going to do, I've put together a handful of posts just in various different places online. And so I want to kind of go and hit those questions and just go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and do that. So first off, Scott, who is a part of the Growing Singers Facebook group, asks, what are the key requirements of a practice regimen that to improve my voice, and how often and how long should I practice? So what are the key requirements of a practice regime? So ultimately, when you're practicing singing, you want to make sure that you are balancing out the voice. The whole purpose of like a warm up, for example, would be to carve a path of right singing. So you want to make sure you have a good, steady, and consistent flow of air. You want to make sure that you're taking good advantage of resonance. You want to make sure that you're not getting too much texture, either too much squeeziness or too much breathiness in there. And that we're, creating a good quality sound that doesn't require the larynx to come up or too much tension. You want to just make sure that you're taking a good advantage of the resonance that you have and creating a good sound. Now, how can you do that? Obviously, warm-ups are a great way to start. There are various different things that you can do to help that. You can kind of work more on the chest voice side of the range. You can work more on the head voice side of the range. And obviously, eventually, you want to bring those together, work on your mixed voice. And I know this is all very vague, but I don't know your voice specifically, so I'm not sure what you're looking to do. But ultimately, what you want to do is practice wherever your deficiencies are. So if you have a little bit of a texture to your sound, you want to work on making sure that those chords are coming together and not pulling apart, right? But we're allowing that sound to be more continuous. So for a lot of people, when they get to a certain part of their range, they'll go, ah, and it'll start to kind of pull apart. You want to make sure that you're doing it in a way, you're speaking the sound in a way, ah, that you're able to keep that coordination. I hope that makes sense. And then, of course, you asked, how long should I practice and how often? It's a kind of a it depends situation. What are you practicing? If you're practicing something really aggressive and you're not quite balanced in that space yet, I would say take it easy. Take 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time. Let your voice be your guide. If you feel like you're really starting to get hoarse or something like that, chill. Dude, you don't need to work so hard, right? But if you're feeling good, keep going. If you're looking to practice like a set list that you're putting together, yeah, put some momentum behind that. As long as you're feeling good, you can practice for an hour at a time pretty easily, pretty much every day. I do suggest at least a day a week of vocal rest, just because I think it's a good idea. It's a good plan. But that's the thought. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to a warm up, I know Scott's asked this about warm ups before in the group. There are times that I'll warm up super, super quickly. Like I'll do 2 or 3 scales. I'll find that my voice is in a good spot and I'm like, boom, good to go. And there are some days that I wake up and I don't know what it is, man. I'm dry. Everything just feels out of whack. Our instrument's not like, a trumpet. It takes a lot to make a trumpet not sound like a trumpet. Our voice is susceptible to so many different elements. So, if I wake up and it's on a day like that, I'm going to just warm up more slowly and I'm going to be a little bit more thorough. So it all kind of depends on what it is you're looking to accomplish with your voice. So I hope that makes sense. So I think that pretty much covers that. Let's move on to David. So, what is the best exercise for increasing range? Also, what is the best way to learn from you one on one if I'm not local? Okay, so Skype singing lessons if you're not local. But the best exercise for increasing range. Sorry, skypesinging lessons.com. I didn't say that well. Best exercise for increasing range. So that's a it's another it depends type of question, right? Um, because it's probably the one that you're not doing. But ultimately, an exercise that I like for increasing range would be like the lip trill, lip bubble, a little. Now, I like it for a handful of reasons. One, it encourages a steady and consistent flow of air. You start pulling back on airflow too much, flutter goes away. You stop. It requires pretty decent and consistent resonance. Same thing, if the resonance starts to shift too much, the sound's going to stop. And the other cool thing about a lip bubble, lip flutter is that we don't tend to sit back and analyze and say, oh, well, I'm singing in chest voice or I'm singing in head voice or I'm singing, where am I? It just feels like you're fluttering. So a lot of the mental aspect of singing high notes goes away with a flutter because it's just making weird sounds. And so that's a tool that we use sometimes as coaches to kind of trick our singers into doing things that maybe they wouldn't do otherwise. That can kind of help you get more comfortable with that part of your range and kind of move forward in that way. So lip flutters are a good choice for getting used to and expanding that range, increasing your range. So, Brittany, who is a client of mine, hence the depth of the question. Hi, Brittany, if you're watching. Um, asks, how do you thin out to reach high notes without backing off of the intensity? Okay, so that's a loaded question. And this is probably going to apply mostly to Brittany. But ultimately, what I would be looking to do if you want to thin out your voice, we know that there's a tendency to be too aggressive, to lean too heavily into the chords as we go higher in our range. And so, how do you thin out? Well, first off, the voice itself naturally needs to thin out as we go higher. If we keep the same degree of depth in the chords and the same degree of lean on those chords as we go higher and higher, we lose all forms of agility. It gets to a yelling feel. It feels very bulky and just not good, and obviously strained, and then eventually cracks sooner or later. And it's kind of interesting, really quickly. So for the higher you go, the faster your chords have to vibrate. Now, technically, they vibrate like this, but to kind of give you an example here, if you put your hands together and you move them really quickly like this, you can do that very quickly with little resistance. Now, if you lean more, if you push your palms together and then try to move quickly, you can't, right? The more weight you have, the more pressure you have here, the less agile you're able to be, the less quickly you can move. The same thing is true for the chords. The more you lean in at the top part of your range, the less quickly those chords can vibrate, which means it's harder for them to hit high notes, which is why oftentimes if you're really heavy on the top end, it pushes flat, which is a little bit lower, a little less vibration. It's a straight tone. It's very, it feels very clunky. And especially for people that are really heavy, sometimes people want to do runs and stuff like that. They just can't find it. That's because their coordination is just too thick. So getting back to the actual question, how do you thin out to reach higher notes? So I would start with head voice. Head voice is just the easiest way to find it. Super light, but bloomy. Don't back off this. Now, the number one tendency that over compressors, people that tend to squeeze too much on those chords have, is to, when you say, okay, lighten up, they just go and they let go completely. So they go from entirely too much to entirely too little. It's like too lazy, right? Just because we're going to thin out the coordination doesn't mean we're not going to have good support and good energy. So we want to take a bloomy head voice sound. We're going to start on ooh because it's just the easiest thing to do. A little woo, that type of feel. Nice and full. We're not going to have a texture if you have you either have too much hike here or those chords are pulling apart. So you got to really over exaggerate that shaping. Woo! And that'll help you find closure in the head voice part of your range, which is a thinner coordination. Now, woo! And once you get used to building that coordination, finding that shaping, finding that momentum in air and chord, then what you're able to do is take that down. And then when you're able to take that down, you find that coordination, you find that connection, then you can start leaning in. Now, the question is, how much leaning in do you really want to do? Okay. So if I go, woo, that's super light. Now, if I shift the resonance, bring the soft pot a little bit more forward, add a little bit of bite to the sound. Whoa! Do I really need more lean? Do I need what were your words? Without backing off the intensity. Okay. So do I need more intensity? I think a lot of people, when they start thinking about a mix, they start getting really aggressive. Now, a good mix voice is, I give credit to one of my mentors here, Brett. Um, a good mix gives you the release of head voice with the fullness of chest voice. Gives you the fullness of chest voice with the release of head voice. So we're going to thin it out, but it's going to feel like head voice. Oh, I can talk to you up here all day if I want to, right? We're going to find that bite. We're going to find that resonance that allows you to speak in that coordination without you having to, push up into it. Hopefully that makes sense and I'm not blowing you guys out of the water here. Okay, cool. So I think that answers that question for the most part. Um, Mo. Mo asks, can you make the mix voice stronger and stronger, or is there a cutoff point? I've developed a good mix after finding a teacher who knew about the term. Okay, cool. So yeah, finding a good mix teacher was hard for me. It took me it was over a decade before I found somebody that could really teach me how to utilize and access my mix, um, which is kind of a shame, but it is what it is. So is life. So within all of that, um, sorry, it looks like something. Okay. So within all of that, can you make the mixed voice stronger and stronger? Okay, so the answer to that is probably yes. I don't know where you are, and I don't know how leaned in of a mix you're in. So if you are in a lighter place and you feel like you need a little more umph, my guess is you can. Now there are limits. Different people, we all have different instruments, right? We all have different vocal tract shapings here. We have different sized tongues. We have different anatomy, different biological makeup. Chords, the vocal cords themselves can be thicker or thinner on different individuals. Now, thicker chord individuals are going to be able to lean into the sound a little more aggressively. All of that said, thinner chord individuals are going to be able to sing circles around the other people, the thicker chord peoples, because they're going to have a lighter sound. So, um, can we lean into it? Absolutely, yes. Is there a cutoff point? Yeah, I mean, to some degree, but I would argue you should probably be able to access what you want to do. Um, I I used to try to be so aggressive with this stuff. And what I've figured out along my vocal journey is that it's really just a shift in the resonance that gives you the power that you want. And then it's all about finding that power without having to be too like forceful with it. The more forceful you get, the more you actually have to work for less sound. So I would argue that, is there a cutoff point? Yes. Would you ever really tangibly want to reach it? Probably not, unless you're doing some pretty hardcore stuff, some pretty heavy leaned in stuff. So, kind of for what it's worth. Now, really quickly on that point, though, I wanted to share an idea, though. Um, Regardless as to whether you're singing, well, you can be singing rather in a healthy place, have a really good healthy coordination, and be um sorry, and then take on more weight with your voice, and it's fine. But you have less stamina there. So in a different way, sorry to say this a little bit differently. Um, Imagine doing squats. If I do body weight squats, I can do a bunch of them. And even if I have bad technique, I can kind of get away with it, right? Because I'm not putting a lot of lean, I'm not putting a lot of weight on the squat, that motion on those muscles that are doing it. Um, And I might feel it a little bit the next day, but it's not gonna be a big deal. Now, the more weight I put on my shoulders when I do that squat, the more I'm going to feel me being out. So if I put 200 pounds on my shoulders and I have bad technique, I'm gonna feel it pretty much immediately, you know? If I put, and if I put 200 pounds on my shoulders and I squat and have really good technique, I'm still going to be able to do less than I would be able to do if I just did body weight. So your voice is kind of a similar way in the way of adding weight, adding more depth, and lean into your mix or into your voice in general. Okay. So yeah. So I guess the clear answer is: are there limits? Yes. But honestly, if you're taking advantage of good resonance and you've got a good balance, you probably don't feel like you need more. That's my guess. Okay. Cool. So we got through David, we got through Brittany, we got through Mo, we got through Scott. So Jill. Jill asks, I've been able to push my range higher by a couple of notes over the past bit, but it doesn't feel good. How can I hit high notes more easily and effortlessly? Okay. So, judging by your vocabulary, I've been able to push my range up higher by a couple of notes over the past bit. So first off, if you've only increased your range by a couple of notes, then you're probably not accessing a mix. You're probably just pushing more and getting your voice used to it. Um, and that's not necessarily the ideal situation. Um, so let's see. So how can I hit high notes more easily and effortlessly? So the easy answer to that is find a mix. But what I'd start with is your speaking voice. So more often than not, if you're pushing your voice up higher, note by note, you're probably going to be adding more and more pressure, more and more weight as you ascend. So most people got, the typical scenario that you hear that's going ah, and it gets pushed and pushed more and more. What I would suggest is start with more of a speech. Oh, 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 and I can talk, right? Oh, 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 oh. Allow that speech, allow yourself to find that sound in that range in a more spoken way. Um, Now, my guess is, you're going to have some musculature in here that's going to want to act up and help out. A little bit of massage can go a long way underneath the chin to get the root of the tongue, back corners of the tongue, or even in this throat area. You also want to make sure that your larynx isn't going up way high like this, but it's staying a little bit more level. You can help out with that by adding a little bit of depth to your sound. Oh, 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 kind of like so. But that's how I would explore um, that upper part of your range more so. It's going to be a completely different approach, but I promise you it will be way more worth it in the long run. You're going to have way more range and ability. Because if you're pushing and just if your goal for high notes is just add a little extra, you're working too hard, like just straight up. Okay, cool. So let's move on. Lynn asks, how do I break the habit of using my neck muscles while singing? Okay, so that's a good question. So I think a question for you, Lynn. How do I not clench my fist? Let go, right? Now, that's the obvious answer, and it's not always that easy. But the first step is awareness, right? We have to be aware that it's there in the first place. So it can be helpful to kind of just allow your hands to lightly be in this area if you use these muscles too much, just so that you know when those muscles are kicking in. Sometimes it'll be, and you'll find that it'll happen at different times. It'll happen at certain times. So it may be once you hit a certain part of your range, or I don't know, whatever the case may be. So you'll learn to anticipate and you'll learn to really become more and more aware of it all. You can use a little massage to help encourage that to release. But long story short, it's going to be practicing and making it habit. You know, it's kind of one of those things where there's no magic pill for it. It's awareness, and like any habit, you have to continuously put in the right action, do the right action over and over to replace that old bad habit. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, next we have Steve. Steve asks, I've got an audition coming up. I'm really nervous. What can I do to make it easier? Okay, so auditions are I think one of the reasons why auditions are so hard for people, it's twofold, okay? One is because we really, really want a result, okay? And two is because we just don't do it enough. The number one piece of advice that I have that nobody wants to hear when it comes to like getting over like building confidence and getting over some of those fears is do it more. So go do more auditions. If you have stage fright, go perform more. Go get out and do karaoke. Go get out and perform in front of your friends and family. Doing that will give you, it'll help you get used to the idea of performing in front of people and make you more comfortable in that scenario. Now, all of that said, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you don't have that ability. So for that, what I suggest is that you put yourself in the position of practicing the audition and really try to see things happening like they would in the audition. So I like literally, and especially my younger clients, I'll have them walk out of the room and walk back into the room and tell me their name and tell me what they're going to sing and then hit the play button and then, have them go through, the whole process. And, when I'm here, obviously they're looking at me like I would be the judge of a competition or, the director or whoever might happen to be behind that table. But, you can do that and imagine that person's there. And so it sounds kind of silly to practice that way, but your brain doesn't really know the difference. Science proves this. We use simulators to get the astronauts to the moon. It's kind of a similar situation. So the more you kind of get used to, the more you do that, the more you kind of get used to it, and it's just a little less intimidating. Okay. So hopefully that helps. Um, let's see here. Do, 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 do. Yeah. Okay. So Ashley asks, "How do I find my singing voice?" Okay. So that's a very vague question, Ashley. I don't know. How do you find your singing voice? Um, that can mean a lot of things, but I'll have to do a little interpreting here. I'm going to put the emphasis on the word my. How do I find my singing voice? Now, this is a question that I feel like a lot of singers ultimately get to. And I think that happens because we grow up and we have our influences and we start, oh, I like this singer, so I start to sing like them and I pick up this singer's traits. And all of a sudden we get all this knowledge and we search on YouTube and we look for how to do different things. And ultimately we find ourselves in a place where it's like, okay, we have a lot of knowledge and we have a lot of ability, but what's natural? You know, and once again, for that, I tend to go back to start with your speaking voice. Start with that pure, authentic speaking voice, whatever that might be. And then really focus on doing a song, not trying to sing a song, but essentially moving through a song in a way where you're just telling a story. It just happens to be on pitched and elongated notes, right? Um, and it's kind of a weird situation. It's kind of a different feel, but the more you kind of play with that, the more that becomes the more you kind of find yourself, the less you start overcomplicating things. Um, I had a mentor teacher of mine a while back say I was doing a Gavin DeGraw song, and she was looking at me. She's like, "Okay, I want you to not sing this like Gavin. I want you to sing it like Ken." And I'm like, "I thought I was, but okay." So I did it the next time, and it was interesting because like these little stylistic things, I was just kind of leaning a little bit too much into. Gavin can have a lot of texture. He has a fair amount of hike, but he has a lot of soul to his voice. If you're not familiar with the singer, um, and it was interesting. It was one of those things where like I was doing that less, but I still had a fair amount of that coming through naturally because it just came through with the way that I interpreted it. But it was 10 times easier from a vocal standpoint. I wasn't working nearly as hard because I wasn't trying to manufacture it. It was just there. Another quick story. I was working with a client of mine, um, and I guess I won't mention his name, but he was a really soulful, super vibey singer. Love this guy's singing voice. I love his voice. Like one of the first times I heard him, I'm like, man, I actually had a little bit of a talent crush. It's one of those things. It's like, this is gonna be cool. It's gonna be a fun guy to work with. But he brought in an original one day, and he just had so much style and so much texture and so much, um, soulfulness to his voice that it was almost like he was working too hard. Um, and I told him, and, it's kind of a hard thing to tell some singers to do this, but I told him, I was like, "Look, stop working so hard. I want you to take all the style out of it." And you could tell he's like, "What? No, that's what I do. That's the," and I was like, "No, no, okay, this is temporary thing. We're not this isn't a forever thing, right? We're just gonna try this. I want you to sing it with literally 0 style." And he did, and it was so interesting because as he went through the song, like teeny little pieces, just very, very subtle elements of style started to peek through. But for the most part, it stayed pretty clean. But those tiny little pieces were 10 times more potent. By the time he got done with the first chorus, the hair on my arm was raised straight up. I mean, we both had chills, and we stopped, and there was like this moment of like, "Holy crap, what just happened?" And I was like, "Yeah, do it like that." And I guess it's one of those things. You have to play with it from a stylistic perspective, and finding your voice is a process. Um, but explore, obviously start with your speaking voice, and kind of go from there. Okay. So, let's see. What do we got next? Brendan asks, what habits would you say lead to singing success? Hey, singing success. It's kind of funny. So, well, there are a lot of them actually. What habits do we use that help us be successful as singers? So, discipline, the ability to show up and practice on a regular basis, even on the days that you're getting mad results. I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle. Um, the ability to both guide the sound, but allow it to be what it needs to be. So it's like we're trying to make something happen, but allow what is happening to happen, to not get in your head about it. When you start practicing something new, one of the more common things, and it's not super common, but it's fairly common, that I'll have singers, come in and, they'll start working on something that's different, and it's difficult for them, because I'm flying. Typically, when someone starts working with me, I'm flying in the face of their bad habits, right? I don't waste time. I just start breaking down the walls. Um, and that's kind of scary and weird, and it feels, these old crutches that someone has are being kind of taken away from them, and it's a little bit vulnerable. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh, but this feels bad, and it's like, oh, I've been a singer for all my life, and it's not working the way I want it to. Immediately right now, it's like, you've been a singer for your whole life, but you haven't sang like this for your whole life. You've been doing this for about 3 minutes. So you have to practice some acceptance, play with new things. I think that's a big tool, a big habit that can lead to success in singing. Um, the ability to, hmm, the ability to constantly be looking to be better than your previous self and to ignore the competition. I think that one's huge. I think entirely too many people focus on the person beside them or in the singing competition with them or whatever the case may be, instead of focusing on being better than they were yesterday. And I think the people that focus on that end up just skyrocketing. Um, so let me see. I had a couple of others that in mind lightly that I wanted to share. Um, Well, that's a good start anyway. All right, cool. So, yeah, those are definitely some good habits. What else have we got? An anonymous person asks, "How can I get past intonation issues?" Okay, so I do get this question semi-frequently online, and it's talking about how can I become more accurate at, singing from a pitch perspective and/or get past intonation issues from a little bit more knowledgeable people. So, pitchiness is either a lack of being able to hear it and create the right sound, or it's typically technical. So if it's really small, if you're just off a little bit here and there, then that's probably a technique thing. It's a shaping thing. You're going way too far from vowel to vowel. Yeah, it just moves entirely too far. So for example, if I were to sing this note, let me get a little. If I sing ah, that's one pitch. If I sing ah, same pitch, different harmonics. Same pitch, different harmonics. If I sing some notes here and some notes up here, and I go back and forth, it's going to feel pitchy no matter how accurate my pitch is, because we don't have a similar tone throughout the sound. So, in order to fix that, you want to focus on maintaining a more consistent shaping. So, you might have to incorporate and modify those vowels a little bit in order to find that momentum. If hopefully that makes sense. If you have issues with pitch in general, um, one of the more interesting things that I've discovered in my teaching is that we all really process singing in a very different way, in different ways, rather. So, for example, me, if I'm singing a cappella, I hear the whole track. I hear the bass, I hear the drums, I hear the guitar, I hear the piano, I hear the vocalist if I want to. It's like a mixer, I can take it out if I want. But I can hear many, 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 many different pieces. And the reason I think I can do that is because I've had years of choir, years of solo singing. I play guitar, I play piano, I sing bass in the choir. So pulling out, singling out the bass is not hard for me. And I've done some audio engineering, a little bit of writing, recording, producing, things like that, very minimally. Um, and so it's one of those things where, like, I'm used to listening to music at a very deep level from many different angles. Whereas, so for example, I was asking my wife about this, and she says, "Oh, well, I hear the piano and I hear the voice." So she would hear like an accompanist or something like that. Whereas I talked to another client of mine who was struggling with some pitch issues, and he said, "Well, I don't really hear much. I kind of see a line, and it goes up and down however much I think it should for for the pitch." And so it makes sense that you would struggle to hit pitches and to be accurate if that was your if that was the way that you processed it. So, one of the things that I would suggest is when you listen and when you sing, that you try to hear in your head, like play in your head, the track, and maybe it's just piano or whatever, and listen for the singer. And you can take the singer out later. But the more you kind of get used to processing it in that way, I think that'll give you something a little bit more to hold on to. And that can be a little bit helpful too. But long story short, another thing that I'll ask or I'll tell people to do every long once in a while, I'll have someone come in and it's like, I'm super passionate about singing. I want to, want to move forward and do lessons and whatnot. And they just that pitch thing is really, really out. Um, scales can be very helpful, but you really have to have a solid ear to know that you're in or out. And if you don't have that, I don't think it's that hard to get that. I've told people to put up a flyer at their local like music school, like a university. I mean, I'm pretty sure anybody there would be happy to make $20 to listen to somebody for 30 minutes to an hour and just say, "Hey, yeah, you were on track here, but you're a little off here." Um, so that's a thing that you can do. But more often than not, I think it's usually intonation. It's either a shaping thing or just an entirely too much push thing. So hopefully that helps and makes sense. And let's see here. See if I have any other quick questions. Do, 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 do. It looks like we are good. All right. So I guess that'll do it for tonight. It's been a whole lot of fun. I'm going to, by the way, I will be announcing future live streams. I'm going to do this again. This has been fun. I've enjoyed it. And I think it's a really good way for me to help you guys. Um, I'll be announcing those on my Facebook group, which is you can find at growing singers.com. It just forwards to the Facebook group. So if you're interested in taking part in or asking questions, group, and you'll be able to be updated on the next one. I'm thinking it'll probably be in a couple of weeks, probably on a Saturday. I want to kind of try a few different times before I settle in on a time. So, if you're interested, join Growing Singers, and that'll be really cool. And I will be seeing you guys around in future videos. All right, bye.